Hello everyone, this is John from RPGs and More, and in today's video I wanted to spend some more time talking about what is quite possibly my second most favorite book in the OSR milieu at the moment. The number one being White Box Dungeon Adventures, and number two, today's topic, being the White Box Cyclopedia. Now, I've talked before about why I like this book in general, and in today's video, I thought I'd dive a little bit deeper into some detail about what it is that makes this book so important to me and what makes me so happy with it. It is a culmination of many years of reading and collecting the works by James Spahn that he has done to support the line of, or the white box line with adventures and treasure and class options and all those other things. A lot of things were put together into this book. I will say this book does not contain any adventures in and of itself. What you're going to get here is primarily rules information. If you want adventures, new adventures, then I recommend that you look into the White Box Quarterly that he is currently releasing. We just got issue 3 released a little while ago. And each issue of that usually includes a heritage, a class, maybe some magic items, as well as an adventure. And other articles included as well. So that's where to get new adventures. But if you just want to get the lowdown on what's in this book, that's kind of what today's topic is going to be. I wanted to cover a few things here. So, in order to not have this be a truly meandering book where I go through, or video where I go through the entire book, I'm going to try to stick myself primarily to what's in the table of contents and explaining the things that stand out to me from there, as well as maybe covering a few items that stand out to me the most. And of course, that assumes that we don't get hijacked by my cat again, because he just tried to claw my toe. Hold on. Oh, nope, he ran away. Yep, this is definitely the chase me moment of play, but we'll see if we can persevere nonetheless. Okay. So, chapter 1 is about the attributes themselves and the character concept. Now, there's lots of neat stuff in this chapter, but I'm not going to go over a lot of that because a lot of it is stuff that, in some ways we've seen before, or it's alternatives to systems that we maybe haven't seen, but we've talked about in some way, shape, or form. So I don't really feel the need to recover what attributes are in an OSR game. There he is. Hi. Chapter 2 is character heritage. It starts out with the classic 4: dwarf, elf, halfling, and human. And what's important here is with this version of White Box, we see a definite separation of heritage and class. For the most part, there are a couple of class as heritage entries later on, but they're not the mainstay, and that hasn't always been the case with some versions of OSR games, but this one has made that separation. It does still incorporate class limits for different heritages, and that is at an attempt of balance, as well as giving the humans who get no special class benefits or special heritage benefits something that kind of stands out for them, because they can go to 10th level in all of them. Okay. But if you want to go beyond those basic 4 and their optional rule modifications, then you've also got the Dagonite, the Damphir, the Gnome, the Goblin, the Half-Elf, the Half-Orc, River Halflings, Shadow Elves, Sylvan Elves, Trollkin, and then heritage as class options. And that is dominated by Table 2.1, which discusses class restrictions by heritage. All right, so that gives you an idea. Now, the ones out of this that kind of stand out to me the most, the Dagonite is kind of neat because it is essentially sort of, it's supposed to represent people that follow the sunken god Dagon. And if you kind of want to bring in a sort of Cthulhu-esque essence to your campaign, then you can include Dagonites as an option to be like the people from below coming up towards the surface and maybe taking part in adventures. Or if you just want to have a fish-related race in your campaign, in your fantasy world, they can also work for that. Although they are a little sinister in how they're designed, so you might have to rework a few things as the DM. The Dhampir, for those that don't know, Dhampirs are kind of like the spawn of a vampire and a mortal. Um, and they have like traits of both, essentially. I Yeah, they're good for gothic horror if that's what you really want. Gnomes, they're gnomes. Goblins, they're goblins. Half elf, half orc, river halflings, shadow elves. They're kind of like the sort of like drow, but not necessarily as inherently dark of nature. So that's kind of a cool thing. Trollkin. Trollkin can also work for like your half giants or your half trolls or your half ogres, things like that. It's a pretty it's got some versatility there, and I might use that in a future solo run for my own games. All right, let's look at chapter 3 now. Chapter 3 has the original classes of the cleric, the fighter, and the magic user. Now, they also have a plethora of options for customizing those classes. So there's things like weapon specialization. For the fighter, there's optional subclasses where you give up things like the ability to wear heavy armor in order to gain the ability to have a second attack if you're like a swashbuckler, stuff like that. There's different options. There's clerics that can become like very powerful at fighting the undead at the expense of high level spells. There are magic users that focus on finding lore at the expense of other things. It's kind of a give and take, and it's really kind of neat. It's a good way to customize your classes without necessarily having a whole new class altogether. But if a whole new class of options is what you're looking for, then here we go. We have acrobat, assassin, barbarian, bard, cavalier, druid, errant fool, friar, jester, metaphysician, monk, paladin, ranger, spiritualist, swashbuckler, thief, tomb robber, wanderer, and then we have another section on heritage as class, including the dwarf battle priest, the elf blade mage, and the halfling folk mage, as well as the she, spelled Sidhe, and the sprite. So a lot of these class options are things that would allow you to add a lot of depth and breadth to your campaign world, a lot of world building just by including a couple of these options. You don't even have to include all of them, although if you wanted to have a very, I would think of it like a gumbo soup of a campaign setting where there's a whole bunch of different things added together that all together make a wonderful dish, but you can still tell their component parts apart when you're looking at it. That's how it was. That's how gumbo was described to me in the past, and seems accurate enough. That is kind of the options that a lot of these give. Things like the metaphysician and the spiritualist really give a far more gothic horror vibe. At least that's kind of where they originated from. Was, if I recall correctly, was in the gothic horror supplement that was written. But they don't have to be that way, although they kind of lean towards that way with kind of studying the undead and things like that. But it's just another way to look at how magic can manifest in your world. Now, the race as class stuff, it's kind of interesting. I mean, the dwarf battle priest, that's something that, it's a dwarf fighter priest combo, which is something that a lot of us have done in the past, especially after the third edition launched. The elf blade mage is a really cool concept of a class that harkens back to the old days of the original white box, yuck, 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 hence the name, of Dungeons and Dragons, where the elf was advancing both as a fighter and as a mage at the same time. And sometimes in some versions of the game, some versions of the basic sets, they would do both at the same time or have to pick one or the other. The one or the other option is what they went for with the white box dungeon adventure, but you have those options in the elf blade mage, which I think is just really cool. It's a nice thing. It's a nice thing to do. The halfling folk mage is kind of like a combination of fighter and magic user, so cool there. The she is definitely it's like the more elf than the elf kind of class. If you think of the she as the fanciful fairy elves of Irish mythology, that really kind of leans into that one, even more heavy into nature and stuff than the elves usually are. So it's a pretty cool option if you want your campaigns to be a little more on the whimsical side, then including the she and the sprite can work wonders for that. The she can also work if you want your games to feel a little more dark and Fae influenced, but leaning into the darker side of the Fae. Then you can include the she and the shadow elves and a few other options like that. Again, it's world building. It's nothing but options, and they're all a lot of fun, while also not being the kind of thing that's going to break the mental load by being too much. Chapter 4, we're looking at equipment, personnel, and accolades. So that's like adventuring gear, transportation gear, weapons and weapons and armor and shields, hirelings and assistants, loyalty for those hirelings and assistants, strongholds, or what do you do with your money after you've gained so much? Strongholds are a great addition to the game if you and your players are up to it. Not all parties like strongholds, and it's not something I believe in forcing on your parties. But at the same time, you've got to make it clear that after they get a certain level, they've got to do something with that money. They can't just sit on a pile like a dragon. Otherwise, they're going to start having dragons come to take it from them or something like that. So a stronghold is a great way to invest your funds. Even if you don't stay to run it yourself, someone else can run it for you while you still go on adventuring. And you're just essentially investing in a hometown, as it were. All right. Chivalry and knighthood is a cool section. I personally really enjoy stories of knights and chivalry, hence my enjoyment of the Prince Valiant series. And combine that with adventures, and you've got a pretty cool mix. So the knights, chivalry and knighthood is something that allows you to add in the ability of characters to gain a knighthood into your setting, while having some rules of how to govern that. What does it take for your character to be declared worthy of becoming a knight? What are the kinds of deeds that might cause them to do so? And how does that work? The accolades kind of gives you a whole system of how to govern that, as well as when they do become a knight, what are the benefits and what are the drawbacks? Because there are some drawbacks and there are some benefits. You get some boons or sometimes a gift of a horse and armor from your lord, the person you swear your fealty to. Uh, and sometimes they also have limitations about how they don't want you. Maybe they don't want you going too far from home, or maybe they need you to go on a specific quest as as their sworn knight. So you've got to kind of weigh the pros and cons of that. But when you're trying to build a setting where the characters are connected to the setting and not just, shiftless vagabonds that happen to carry the equivalents of magical tactical nuclear weapons around with them, but have no, attachment to anything, then, you know, things like having a liege lord and having responsibilities and duties that are larger than themselves is a good way to help anchor that character. All right. There's how to become a knight, the different kinds of knights, like the knight protector, the knight errant, the house knight, the peasant knight, or the tournament knight, how to manage your accolade rewards and bonuses. Then we go to chapter 5. Chapter 5 is all about playing the game. So that covers your kind of movement basics, how to gain experience, how to run combat and initiative and armor class, how to handle damage and death. There's also the healing and binding wounds special rule that allows you to, as long as you have a health kit, you can heal and bind your party's wounds. And each one of them can gain back a certain amount of wounds based upon a die roll after each combat. It's a cool little, add-on rule that kind of takes some of the magical healing weight off of the cleric, especially if no one in your party wants to play a cleric. But it can get expensive because the healing that costs a healing kit, and the healing kit itself costs about 10 gold pieces per kit and is expended upon use. So it's something that you're constantly pouring money back into unless you have a cleric who can start casting those spells. But maybe your world doesn't have clerics, and so this is a good way for you to still get some ability to recover hit points without having to simply go on full rest. So it's kind of neat. I like it as an optional rule. All right. Invisible opponents, morale, negotiations and diplomacy, saving throws, wilderness exploration, and hex crawling. There's a nice little section on that, which is pretty cool. Talking about rough terrain, foraging, starvation, seafaring, a whole section on seafaring that goes from page 130 to 133. And there's a lot of stuff covered in those few pages, which just give you a framework on how to add a lot of fun detail to your seafaring. As well as there's also an example of play and a section on poisons. Okay, so then we move on to chapter 6, Magic and Other Arcana. There are a lot of spells in this book. So to give you an idea, the spell descriptions go from page 144 all the way to 172. So far in this section, that is the largest single section of any chapter in this book. There are a lot of spells, and that's good. There's maybe not as many as you might be used to in some other books and some other editions of the game, but this covers a lot, and it does so in a fantastic manner. And you got some guidance on how to invent your own spells if what is here isn't enough for you. So that's pretty nice. All right, difference between latent spellcasters and blessed scions. So you can kind of like become a spellcaster later in life if you weren't already one. Rules for how to fight arcane duels. If you want to have your wizards be able to duel each other without necessarily slinging specific spells back and forth. It's a neat system. Psychic talents. If you want to include psionics in your game, it's got a list for those. Okay, so now we go to chapter 7, running the game. We got sections about the principles of being a referee and how to design a game session. And then we have sections on the different kinds of game sessions that you can run. For example, how do you run a City of Thieves style game? How do you run a fairy story style of game? How do you run a gothic horror style of game, which is my personal favorite because I really enjoy the dread rules as well as the corruption rules. And it's something that I'm incorporating into my own solo playtest, not playtest, but solo play game, because I really enjoy kind of using corruption as something that not just to mess with the player characters, but give them something else to understand that the world is affecting them. Because I think that fear is something that should be present especially if you're using my favorite antagonists in a setting, the undead. Characters shouldn't be just waltzing through encounters with the undead, being like, "Oh, well, I guess we just fought a bunch of skeletons of, my long lost relatives. Huh, that wasn't fun." No, that should really affect how they think, and the dread, as well as the corruption, sort of helps to manifest that in a rule sense. And then there's also the Riddle of Steel section, which is a how do you run a game that focuses primarily upon combat, especially melee combat, and it talks about gladiatorial matches and things like that. All right. Experience points, carousing, advancement, and all those other fun stuff kind of bring you to the end of chapter 7. And then we go to chapter 8. And in chapter 8, that's the bestiary. And that one goes from page 196 all the way to 247. So that is the largest section of the book, the largest single section, I should say. There is a lot of monsters in this book, and many of those monsters have different variants of them in order to help you kind of dress things up. And it gives you a lot of ideas of what you can do if you want to modify the monsters to be kind of your own creation. And that's the thing that I like the most about monster sections, because yeah, I can run. See, I've got 3 different sizes of giant centipede: the giant centipede large, medium, and giant centipede small. But I can also take the giant centipede stat block and call it something else entirely. If I just want to have a different weird creature that has similar stats but does something different. And that's part of the fun of this monster section, is it gives you some ideas on how to do that. It also includes wandering monster frequencies as well as monster creation rules. We just talked about that. And and then here we go. Chapter 9, treasures. Treasure items, how to generate random treasures for your dungeons. We got different kinds of scrolls and magic items, weapons and armor, things like that, miscellaneous magic items. There's a lot of stuff there. And that brings us all the way to the cursed item descriptions, which is the last part, at page 294. Actually, is that 284? 284, I apologize. And then at 286, you will find the information about the AELF license, which is the license under which this book is made, and the rules that it uses are covered. So that's by Mythmere Games. So if you wanted to, say, provide more material for this game, you could also use that same license. And then, of course, there's the white box Cyclopedia character sheet on page 287. Now, let's give you a look at that character sheet, because I know, despite how huge this game is, here we go. That's the character sheet. That's the front side of it. All right. Give you an idea of what that looks like. Okay. All right. It's not nothing, but it's not as detailed as others I've seen. And then here we have the back side of it. Okay. On the back side, you've got things like your health, which gives you lots of different boxes to start tracking the health of your character. Sorry, that's wealth. All right, never mind. But it is your wealth. A lot of different places to track how many different things that you have on you, like different kinds of coins and different kinds of gems and things like that. Okay, fine. Spells per day up to 6th level, equipment, and notes. So that gives you more of an idea of how much is in this book. And hopefully a little bit more of an idea of why it is something that I recommend a lot, because this is a great toolbox. And that's kind of what I've described it as before, and I will double down on that tonight. There are so many options that you can use in order to kind of customize your campaign setting. Now, one of the temptations, especially for me, when I first got this book was I want to have a campaign setting that has everything. I want all the things in my soup. Make me a bowl of soup with every single ingredient. And as I have discovered with real life cooking, that's not always a great idea. As flavorful as such a soup can be, if you make a soup with all of the vegetables all at the same time, it can get well, it just kind of becomes a mush in the end. So I am a bigger believer these days of having a more curated campaign setting where you select the things that they're most important to you. And you, for example, if you only want a certain kinds of monsters in your setting, let's say that you really want to have a setting that explores humanity versus the monsters. So maybe you incorporate a lot of the different classes that are in this world, but you don't necessarily incorporate the other heritages. Or if you do, then you reskin them to all be different kinds of human beings, although that kind of defeats the purpose of having them as separate heritages, if I'm perfectly honest. So my recommendation would be, if you're going to do that, just stay to the human heritage and use the classes to be the differentiation. And then you can take a more delicate approach to the monsters, and perhaps you focus on things like, say the giant centipedes and the giant rats and the giant bats and other creatures that aren't, among the non-human humanoids, but are instead, actual like variations of natural monsters or variations on humans themselves, humans that have become cultists or humans that have become the undead. I think humans and undead is an excellent combination too. And when you do that, then you can actually create your own random monster tables, like most DMs would anyway. But this book gives you a lot of kind of guidance on how to do that. And that's not to say that other books don't. I'm not trying to attack any one setting. Most of us have been around long enough to know that when you get a book for a setting, you're going to get that information, and you just have to feel comfortable in modifying that information in order to say and do the things that you want. So it's cool. And that's part of why I like the cyclopedias, because it makes that job easier. Because there's a lot of information. But at the other hand, a lot of the stuff in there is not like, if you change one thing, there's not as many other details that will get modified by that one change as there might be with, say, 5th edition. All right. So I've talked a lot for a while about this. I don't want to go on too much longer because I don't want this video lasting forever. So here's what I will say to sum it all up in the end. Yep, great book. Yes, second favorite in the whole thing. Full of information. I don't want to share too much of that stuff in detail on this channel because unlike the Prince Valiant setting and rule system, this one is very much still in print, despite what some sellers on eBay might have you believe. And therefore is easy to get your hands on in either a PDF or a hard book fashion. You can get it from Drive-Thru RPG. I don't post a link because I don't have an affiliate link, and I don't want to people. I'm not affiliated with any of this. I'm just a fan. All right, and that's all I'm happy to be. All right. So yeah, you can pick this up. It's not cheap. It's going to cost you about the same as it would to get a 5th edition player's handbook. But this is everything. Player's handbook, monster manual, and dungeon master's guide all in one. And it'll take you up to level 10, which is where most of the game happens anyway, is between levels 1 and 10. And it's really all you'll ever need as far as white box gaming goes. And the material is being continuously expanded by Mr. Spawn in the release of the white box quarterlies, which are meant to coincide with the contents of the white box Cyclopedia. And there's even rumors that he might do some work on a campaign setting at some point in the future. That is a hope. That is not fact. So I only say it because I've seen it on his, if I recall correctly, I saw it on his blog where he mentioned, as well as in the Discord, that he talks about white box. It's something he wants to do if he gets the opportunity and the time. And I support that because I really enjoyed his work on Willow Valley. I thought Willow Valley was really fun, and I've used it multiple times, and I really would love to see more work being done on it if that's what he wants to do, or on something else different than that, that is that he can just really flesh out to his heart's content. One of the reasons why I like Willow Valley is because there's enough information between the three adventures and the little gazetteer that's in the White Box Compendium book that he released. There's enough information to allow you to either run it pure as a white box setting, and you can do that using the White Box Cyclopedia. You can also modify it. Like I actually did a kind of a solo game for myself. It didn't last too long because I had to move around and do a bunch of other stuff and just kind of set it aside and let it go after a while. But I did this thing, and I did it in my head for the most part, where I essentially just transitioned the Willow Valley setting into more of a 16th to 17th century setting, where you would have characters had early smoothbore muskets, and there were still swords and breastplates and things like that, but it was much more akin to the back swords and bucklers setting. That is the one that was made for that system, more of an Elizabethan, if you will, style setting instead of a or I'd even associate it with the English Civil Wars in the early English Civil Wars era. I kind of liked that as a concept and thought it made for some interesting options because you can kind of dig into some of the especially with the first adventure, the Were Rat's Well. No surprise, no spoiler, but at least one were rat might be involved or not. You'll have to play it to find out. Um, but let's say one is, then there's the idea of could you buy silver bullets at the or make silver bullets from silver coins, say if you had the ability to do so. I mean, that's kind of a fun thing, and it kind of plays into some tropes of the Gothic horror type stuff, which you could then take the Gothic horror rules of the Rules Cyclopedia, combine that with that setting, and you've got something really kind of cool and unique. I did that. I also did a one where I incorporated other fantasy races that aren't part of this, that were my own creation. And my players ended up actually going off the rails, which didn't surprise me one bit. And they spent most of their time exploring the islands on the lake on Willow Lake in the middle of Willow Valley, instead of going after the Were Rat's Well. Although they did eventually finish that one, as well as try to go into the Wizard's Tower. But really, the islands were much more interesting to them, and that was something that I kind of made up on the fly as we went because it was a fun little adventure and vignette, and they found some cool things along the way. And that was again, that's something that you can do with Willow Valley because it's got enough detail to be an excellent springboard, but it's also vague enough in some areas that you can kind of you can shoehorn your own stuff into there, and it's okay. I especially love that there's kind of a Barrow Downs-esque section of the map that is it's kind of a swamp, but also is full of ancient tombs and gravestones, and parts of it are also inhabited by a lizard tribes of lizard men. And what do you do with that information? What do you do with exploring the undead? And there's like a lot of fun to be had there for exploring different tombs and other structures that are partially submerged under the swamp, and what all that means and how that connects to the struggle against the big bad of the setting from ages long past. So it's a neat little gem. It's a wonderful gem. If you haven't read it yet, and you're looking for something to use your white box cyclopedia with, I do highly recommend picking up the white box compendium and just using those 3 adventures in that setting that's in that book, because they're alone, I think they're worth the price of the compendium. Uh, they're a lot of fun. You can get the adventures independently, but it's in the compendium that you find the Willow Valley Gazetteer, which has a more detailed information about Willow Valley as a whole, as well as about Willowford, the village that is kind of like your hometown in the setting. So that's why I would recommend that one. But again, it all comes back to this is your toolbox. Combine this with whatever setting you want to use or you already have for a white box style game, or even grab a different setting for a different published game and just transition the rules into what can work for white box, because a lot of the stuff here is so uh, accessible that it won't take much for you to convert it over, and you're not going to you might, if you're converting over from something like, say, 5th edition D&D, some characters or NPCs in, like, let's say you wanted to take Lost Mine of Phandelver and run it with white box, you might lose you will lose some granularity, and some of the individual powers of the monsters are not going to be the same, and that's just truth. Honestly, I'm not sure I'd miss it. I think that I would do just fine running that game with this system, or with something else that I might want to run it with that would be even simpler, like, say, Sword and Backpack. Now, wouldn't that be fun? Taking a more an adventure like Lost Mines of Phandelver and playing it with a system like Sword and Backpack. But that's a different story and a different video to discuss. So, again, we're going to sum that up. We have summed it up. I have gone on my tangent, and I hope that it was at least somewhat useful. Thank you so much for your time and your attention today. I have a little bit more time to make videos like this. I have tonight and I have tomorrow to make some videos, and after that I'm going to be returning to my busy work schedule, and I can't guarantee the next time after that I will have to make videos. So we'll see how it goes. And I may not be able to make one tomorrow. That will depend on how bad the late night fireworks are where I'm at. So we'll see. Because I'd rather not do a video with a bunch of fireworks going off in the background if I can help it. I'll be spending time making sure that my cat's okay, because he does not like the fireworks. Anyway, thank you so much for your time and attention. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and peace be with you. Bye-bye.